Hello, welcome out there to our virtual On the Couch, exploring how our leaders are dealing with the current environment. My name is Marcus Lojszczyk. I'm a partner at PwC, together with my other partners, where we every day help clients in the public sector working through their challenges and their difficult scenarios. And it's something that we're very proud to do. Today's session, I'm going to be talking with Caroline Mealor from the Attorney General's Department. We're going to explore how Caroline has helped her team navigate through the recent COVID-19 crisis, but also explore some of the things that are unique to the Attorney General's Department, but also now that we're lightening restrictions, what that means as we look forward to, if I can put in quotes, the new normal. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting virtually today on the land, or the traditional land of the Kaurna peoples. Do pay our respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge their cultural and spiritual relationship to the land that we meet on. Caroline, welcome.
Thank you.
Having worked with you a little bit and seeing what's been going on with the Attorney Generals over the last 6 months, it's been a busy period. So,
yes, yeah.
I know, a lot of your people moved from one premises to a new premises just before Christmas. Part of your department probably had a lot to deal with the fires over summer, and then we have COVID-19 hit. Some of those changes were very planned and very structured, and then something like COVID-19 hits, which is unstructured. As a leader, I'm interested to understand how you've dealt with those two different scenarios and compare and contrast, and what COVID-19's also meant for how you've been able to keep the business going.
Sure. So we moved from 45 Perry Street to 10 Franklin Street to the new GPO Tower building. And that was a move that we arrived in November, but that had been a very planned move that over several years. And so I think that when 700 of my 1,400 staff arrived in 10 Franklin Street in November, everyone took a big sigh of relief. And looked forward to 2020 as a year without change. And of course, it hasn't been a year without change. You're right, some areas of the business had a lot to do with bushfires, in particular the government radio network and our public safety areas. And then COVID hit. And so in terms of comparing and contrasting, it was going from one major change that was well planned and thought out over a long period of time to a significant change over days, effectively. So in both scenarios, dealing with the change successfully has been about teamwork and about my executive pulling together and working together really effectively, and that's something I'm really proud of. But obviously you can't deliberate and plan for something like COVID-19 in the same way that you can with building a new building and moving into it. And so dealing with the changes that COVID-19 has brought about for a workforce has been about needing to work really quickly and flexibly, deferring to others, going with your gut feel sometimes, looking towards central government for guidance, but at the same time needing to be conscious of the individual needs of our department, which is, different from other departments in some ways, in that we're a central agency. We do have some customer-facing areas, but we're the lawyers of the state, and we provide policy advice, and so those areas aren't so customer-facing. So in terms of how you talk about me being the leader, I don't feel like I've been the leader. I feel like I've been part of a team that's worked really hard and really effectively together to move a workforce largely out of an office and home. And so we've had, for the better part of the last 6 to 8 weeks, more than 70% of our staff working from home, and I think doing so really effectively. Obviously, some areas of our business have dropped off a bit in that hotels, restaurants haven't been opened, so there aren't that many inquiries about liquor licensing or people asking for liquor licences. The higher courts haven't been conducting jury trials, so our prosecutors haven't been doing trials, but they've been doing other work, and I think we'll talk about it a bit later, but they've been seconded to other areas of the public service. But I think by and large we've very much maintained service provision to the community. just one example, Consumer and Business Services that sits in the department, they've closed their customer service centre, but they've put in a new telephone system which enables staff to work from home and be answering calls from customers sitting in their study or at their kitchen table at home, and so therefore still maintaining that same level of service.
Yeah. Those restrictions that have come in, a lot that just came from left field. What was the biggest challenge? What was the thing that was hardest in this recent time?
One from the sort of corporate, but also one personally, I think that the hardest challenge, as I've alluded to, was having to move so quickly and to have to completely reimagine the way we worked and the way we did business and the way we interacted with customers. So that was a real challenge because we didn't have 6 weeks to work out the best way forward. Personally, I was really challenged about the notion of having to work at home, at least for some of the time. The best thing about my job is my interactions with other people. And so having to deal with my personal disquiet while still, chin up, carry on, it's all going to be fine. I found, as a leader, I found that very challenging to have to put aside my own disquiet and concern for myself, my family, my friends, and concentrate on being the chief executive.
Yeah. I must admit, I know everyone's watching on a screen there, but we're actually face to face, and to be doing something that's not on a Zoom or a Teams is actually really nice.
This is like a big day out for me, yeah, at the moment.
So that was the biggest challenge. What have you been most proud of, probably for the department and also personally in the most recent sort of few months?
Without repeating myself, it is about the teamwork and it's the resilience. People have, by and large, just got on with it. They've put up with inconvenience. Everyone's had to work from home and we've had to rush IT to help them. People have gone, I can do it at my kitchen table if I need to. I'm really proud of the way our HR and IT and our corporate services have responded to assist people, whether it is through IT, HR, advice on how to deal with human resource issues, those members of our staff who are vulnerable. We've really wrapped services and assistance around our staff to help them. And I've been really pleased by the amount of feedback I've got from staff saying, thank you, it's been great. IT's been amazing, HR's been helpful. The communications you've sent out have really made us feel at ease and comfortable about getting on with our jobs.
Yeah, awesome. Those national and state restrictions and requirements that have come down and impacted all of us, I'm just conscious that the Attorney General's Department is very diverse and does many different things. What subset of the department has had the biggest impact from those restrictions and has impacted its business delivery the most?
Well, definitely Consumer and Business Services. The Commissioner of Consumer and Business Services regulates liquor licensing. And so obviously with the closing down of those businesses, not only has Denny Sulio, the Commissioner, been tirelessly having to answer queries and take calls from licensees, but obviously that closed down the business effectively, in that part of the response we've had to assist businesses has been to suspend licences, so people haven't having to be paying for liquor licences for venues that have been closed. So that's probably had a huge impact. Also the Small Business Commissioner, who's now involved in negotiating disagreements or changes to contractual arrangements in tenancies, particularly commercial tenancies. And then the Crown has also had a huge, they've been inundated with the legal advice they've been providing all of government, whether it's on the issuing of declarations by the state coordinator, how to respond legally to issues, what the impact of the virus has on contracts that government has up and running. And as I've alluded to before, areas like the DPP, they've seen a change in the way in which they work. Also the public trustee, their phone calls, their number of calls a day increased exponentially as a result of the $750 federal payments and things like that. So it's had quite an impact on our agency.
Yeah. As CEO, with all those moving parts, an average day, what's your focus? How do you focus? How do you bring into what needs attention first and foremost for the day that's ahead, right? It's challenging.
Well, I'm a bit of a list maker, but I'm certainly in the last few months, the list ends up sitting on the desk and I don't get anywhere near the list because the phone rings or something happens overnight or there's a change. To be frank, I thought if you'd asked me 3 months ago, I would have said, I reckon it's all going to go pretty quiet. And it hasn't. Like, we've been really busy in all areas of the department. And that's been good because I would have gone, I would have found it really difficult if we'd been very, very quiet. I think it's about getting through a day like that is about prioritising. It's about coordinating. So I can't do it all. So who's the subject expert? Who's the person responsible? Are they doing it? So I feel like even more so than usual, I've been more like a conductor through all this. Mm-hmm. Who's doing what? Are we all touching base? How many hundreds of people need to be CC'd in on the same email so everyone knows? I've been proud that a lot of the time I'm picking up the phone and I'm saying, we've got to do X, and the person at the other end of the phone goes, we're already on it. So it's not getting into the weeds, it's making sure it's trusting the people that can do the job to do it, and just keeping oversight of and touching base with people to make sure they've got the assistance they need, that they're okay personally, that they're not, they don't need assistance to deal with the stress they're trying to deal with, and keeping in touch and communicating really clearly with the Minister's office so that there are no surprises for her and her staff.
Yeah. At the height of this pandemic, if we go back 3 or 4 weeks, there's a lot of anxiety in the community, but I'm sure there's a lot of anxiety in your wider team. Mm. Was there any key initiatives you had as a leader, or any calls to action, or was there any sort of rah-rah that you had to sort of focus the team about, this is actually how we're going to do it?
Well, I think like lots of other government departments, we really quickly formed a kind of a response team, if you like, which was made up of our senior executives and relevant people from our corporate section. We've met every week by Teams, Microsoft Teams meeting, but also we're always in contact with each other. We decided really early it was important, obviously, to make sure that the work environment was clean, but also knowing that we would be telling people to go home and work from home if they could. We were really clear that communication was going to be the key to getting through this, not only so that to try and alleviate people's concerns, but also to make sure they felt supported in whatever they were doing. So I was sending out regular emails. That they've become a bit less frequent now, mm-hmm. but emails around leave, people's health, people's mental health, specific information for managers. How do you manage a team that are all working from home? Things around productivity, which obviously is an important issue, and making sure that business unit heads and their business service managers had all the tools they needed to assist their staff. I think for us that was the priority, and I think it's paid off. It's really helped us get through the last few months.
Yeah, we've been doing this virtual series sort of throughout the pandemic, and initial conversations were the emergency response and how do we deal with just dealing with it.
Yeah.
More recent times, we're in this, okay, how do we keep things going? June the 1st was Monday, just gone. The restrictions are starting to lighten up, and I think when I'm talking to people, they're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's an, in quotes, normal. How do you see them moving towards the, in quotes, normal, and how's that different from what we've been through to date to what's going to have to be done as a leader in the next few months, I suspect?
I think it's a 2-stage process. I think the first stage is getting back to work. And as we know, at the moment, the state government and its position is continue to work from home if you can. And so we're continuing to put that message out, but we are preparing to come back to work. And so we're putting out material to assist people in the agency about a range of things that we will do corporately, and that's largely about a safe environment. So things as practically as measuring the space between offices and workstations and in meeting rooms and kitchens to make sure that we're compliant with the 1.5 metres. We've convinced the building owners to recalibrate our lifts so that BHP are their other main tenant of our building. So 3 of the lifts are BHP's lifts, the others are ours, so they won't stop on the first 10 floors. And they'll only allow 4 people to get into them, that kind of thing. And so we're putting that information out so that people know that that's what it's going to be like when they come back. Then there are lots of things that we're asking business units to make decisions about themselves because, as you mentioned, we are a very varied agency. So things like maybe everybody doesn't start at 8:45 in the morning because then we're not cluttering up our foyer, we're not cluttering up public transport. But each business unit has to make a decision themselves about who needs to be in the building and when. If you're a policy officer, you can get to work at 11 o'clock in the morning and leave at 7. But if you're on the phones at the public trustee answering questions from clients, it's not helping the client if you're still on the bus at 10 a.m. Unless somebody else is picking up your phone. So there's a lot of those, basic but really important decisions that business units will need to make. And so we're providing materials, really like a checklist. Here are 40 things you need to think about. And obviously we're really keen to have that all in place before the government says it's time to go back to work. The next stage, I think, is what will the new normal be? I imagine a lot of people will go, it's really worked for me to work from home. I'd like to keep doing it. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity to do things differently. I've spent most of my career as one of those people that goes, you get in, you go to work, you go home, none of this part-time. No, I am supportive of part-time, but I have a very concrete view of what working is. Yeah. And it's been personally and professionally, I think, a real opportunity because it's actually made me realise you can sit on the couch with a tablet and you can get sometimes a whole lot more work done or at your kitchen table than you would in an office and still work really productively and still stay in touch with the people you need to stay in touch with. So the next stage will be about deciding what's our business going to look like going forward. Are we, what's the right balance of working from home, being in the office, in order to keep our staff happy but productive and also making sure that we're delivering the services that we need to deliver. And the real challenge for that will be it won't be the same in the DPP as it is in the Equal Opportunity Commission, as it is for our corporate services. It's going to be a real cross-section of what will work. And so the messaging around that's going to be really important. In the same way that the message has been important before now, because where we've had some areas of our department where they've needed to be in the office, there've been some people that have gone, well, all those other people are working from home. Does that mean I'm not as important or my safety's not as important? And so, we're going to have to traverse that again, but in reverse in some ways.
Yeah. It's interesting talking to a lot of organisations that through this period they've had different impacts on demand for their services. And with the services that you offer and the interfaces you have with the public, I imagine you've had a similar scenario and some probably gone down, some probably gone up. But as we're going to this period, what's the anticipated impact on demand for your services from the Attorney Generals, and how do you prepare for that given this new normal?
Well, some of it we know. So as I said before, the District and Supreme Court have suspended jury trials, but they've indicated that they will recommence jury trials in July. So obviously the DPP will be needing to be ready to provide prosecutors for all of those trials that will happen. As I said, there's some areas of CBS where work has tapered off, but we are obviously aware that there's been, with the reopening of hotels and bars, etc., and restaurants, albeit in a limited way, that's picking up that work again for the licensing areas. Most of the other areas in the department have continued to provide services. They've just done them in a different way, as I've said before, from home or without a customer service centre. So it's about those areas preparing on the basis that we do go into a situation where we do reopen those service centres. Again, making sure they're safe, making sure that we remove furniture if we need to. Do we need to reconfigure things like that? So for most of us, albeit we might not know when, we know what will happen when they reopen. And if I can use the jury trials as an example, we've been in pretty constant conversations with the courts around what a jury trial will look like when it happens. Because obviously if you have a jury, they need to socially distance. So you can't put them in a jury box next to each other, nor can you put them in a jury room to deliberate if it's not big enough to comply with restrictions. So what the courts are planning are trials where a jury trial will require 2 courtrooms, where when the trial is sitting, the jury will sit in the gallery, so they'll be able to be spread out, and then they'll use the second courtroom as their deliberation room. And in fact, when the restrictions first came in, there was a murder trial running in the Supreme Court, and that trial continued in that way, using 2 courtrooms to spread everybody out, and that trial was completed successfully. So we've already had a practice go at that. So that's going to be quite a change, I think, for the DPP.
Yeah. We've kind of talked about pre, during. I'm interested to sort of turn attention to post, and let's imagine a scenario where there's a magic shot and vaccine or another management way such that the bug's not as problematic as it is now. Talking to a lot of organisations and a lot of leaders like yourself, there's things that have happened during this response that we've gone, actually, that's pretty good. We might embed that into our normal going forward. What are some examples of those things that have come across your mind as CEO that you'd like to take forward into normality when we are back there?
Sure. I mean, something as simple and practical as the hygiene, the upped hygiene. I mean, maybe we'll get to a point, hopefully, where we don't have to socially distance in the same way. But it is really interesting to see the drop-off in, the flu season. The number of people with flu is just so much less. But even people taking sick days, we've noticed a real reduction in the number of sick days. So I think people are healthier because they've been more conscious of hygiene. I mean, that's a very sort of practical thing. The flexibility in working, as I've described, I think that's really something that I want to embrace and try and make work. Even the use of online meetings, maybe not always, but the time that is saved in being able to log on to a Teams meeting 30 seconds before it starts rather than walking 10 minutes to a meeting and waiting, and the same at the other end, to be able to just, click off and get on with what you're doing. I mean, that's a huge saving in time and productivity. So, and even though I think it took people a little bit of time to get used to, I think people have realised you can actually have a really productive meeting in that way. You've got to chair a meeting in a slightly different way when you're doing it virtually, and I think there's a slightly different etiquette to being at a meeting that's virtual, but I think it's still really effective. So I very much hope that we can embed that. They're probably the main things, I think, and also that piece of work around productivity. I mean, I don't think we've mastered it yet, but realising that people can be very productive even if they're at home and they go and they take that off between 3 and 4 to pick up their child and then come home and work for another couple of hours while their child's doing their homework, that's still a legitimate working day. So I think that the focus on productivity versus I'm in the office or I'm not in the office is a mind shift for people, I think, which is a really good thing.
Yeah, indeed. Just reflecting on South Australia, and we both live here, and I think it's fair to say South Australia and Adelaide has dealt with this better than most places around the world when we look at the news. So in a way, we're dealing with some of these things before others will have to deal with them. If you could give a guidance or recommendation or a model or a framework suggestion to a CEO in another jurisdiction who's maybe slightly behind what we're doing, what would that be? What are the things you've drawn on? What would be your recommendation to that CEO?
It would be move early, move quickly, communicate, share the problem with your senior staff, your senior executives, make them part of the answer. Be upfront about what you don't know. As part of the Senior Management Council, which is the meeting of all CEs, I've tried to be as open as some things are confidential, but I've tried to come back and pass that information on to my staff. And sometimes the information is we don't know. So I think really they're the main things. Also, I think it's working together as a group of CEs across government. I think it's been a really supportive experience, and people have rung to check in on each other. They've shared materials, what they're doing. And obviously, we've worked really hard to have a consistency across the public sector in the way that we've dealt with things, so that no one goes, hang on, well, that's not what's happening in transport, or I heard they were doing it differently. And so there's been strong leadership from the Department of Premier and Cabinet around that, which has been great.
Is there something you suggest someone steers clear of that maybe was something you could do a different way if you had another chance at it?
Not really. That sounds a bit arrogant, doesn't it? But nothing really comes to mind. Not so much as a CEO. Obviously, we've had a few missteps along the way with the recovery in terms of, you'll probably recall a couple of weeks ago with the opening of restaurants and hotels, there was some issues around the licensing and what licence, you could open with some licences and not the others, and so the Commissioner had to make some decisions to get an even playing field. I don't think that's about saying we do it differently. I think it's about realising that with something this novel that we've never been through before, you're not going to get everything right. And I think maybe it's about acknowledging that and just accepting it and solving the problem for the business or community for what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. That's very fair. Caroline, we've had the benefit of some questions come in before the session, which been shared with me. So I'm going to fire a few questions at you that have come from out there in internet world. So thank you, everyone out there. First one, what rapid changes have you had to enact in legislation to help ensure continuity of business across South Australia?
Most of the changes to assist business haven't been legislative. So things like grants haven't, and obviously all the federal job seeker stuff was legislative, but that's not South Australian. The main thing we've legislated around is a moratorium on evictions for tenants in commercial and residential tenancies, and that was done through legislation passed in the Parliament in April. The other significant thing we've done for business, as I referred to before, was around liquor licensing and the suspension of the need to pay liquor licensing fees in 1920. But that wasn't legislative. That was a discretion that the Commissioner had and a decision he made. So, yeah, it's the trying to assist tenants affected by loss of business or loss of income through COVID-19 to ensure that they wouldn't get evicted by tenants. And so as part of that, the Small Business Commissioner has a legislated role in mediating disputes between tenants and landlords, which, if not resolved, can be escalated to the Magistrates Court, and the Magistrates Court can make decisions around and make orders to stop a tenant being evicted or being evicted for a certain period of time, and orders around whether rent is to be paid, and if so, how much for an extended period of time. And that legislation is time limited to the emergency declaration, or 6 months after it was enacted, which will be around October, whichever's the sooner. I'm
conscious that in this period, doing things like that and legislation, getting things like that through a parliament is kind of not the way it's normally done.
No.
Any observations about that and working through that with the respective ministers of the parliament, and then what your team had to do to respond?
Sure. So, policy on the run is never particularly good policy. The legislation that was passed, the COVID-19 emergency legislation, is legislation committed to the Premier, but a decision was made by Cabinet that the Attorney-General would take that legislation through the lower house. And so the Attorney-General's Department acted as a kind of the conduit to which all other agencies could bring their proposals about what they would like change to assist in getting through COVID-19. So, as I say, there are some things around business, but there are also a raft of measures to make things easier. So the suspension of reporting arrangements, or the governor being able to extend an appointment for a period of time. Something as simple as, under the IPAA Act, the Environment Protection Act, being able to give somebody who is taking their cans for collection, the former legislation said you had to give them cash. So we amended the legislation so that you can swipe your card. Something that simple, but in terms of social distancing, really important. Yeah. So all those agencies fed their proposals into the Attorney-General's Department. We developed legislation with, obviously, Parliamentary Council, which obviously then Cabinet approved and took to Parliament. It all happened very, very quickly. The same thing's been happening in all other jurisdictions as well. And so it was a really collaborative effort. And, obviously there were areas of the legislation that the opposition and the crossbenchers had questions about, but by and large it was pretty much a bipartisan effort to get it through Parliament pretty quickly. And we've gone back with some further amendments to that legislation sort of a month later, which involved tweaking some of what we'd already done, largely in light of how quickly we'd moved, but also to add a few extra bits and pieces in.
Yeah, excellent. Obviously a lot of interest in this next question, and I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but what positive changes has COVID brought about that you think will continue when we go back to normal? Anything to add to what we talked about earlier?
Not really. I think it really is a real opportunity, and it's not just about working from home. It's been a real opportunity to reimagine how we work, and to consider efficiencies and the need for meetings, who needs to be in the meetings, how long they need to be. And I'm not sure that I can think of any other event other than something like this where we would do that. I've got a lot of lawyers in my building and we're all very good at going, why do we do that? Because that's the way we've always done it. So forcing yourself to do it differently has been, I think, the best thing to come out of this whole experience. Other than that, and being able to work at home in your pyjamas, which has also been a bit of a highlight.
Although we've got to do a bit of an excursion today and get dressed up, right? So that's good. I think we also touched on this a little bit, but effect on the court system. You talked about how cases were managed differently with the dual courtrooms. I guess maybe to explore this a bit further, adjustments that may be continued or maybe taken from what we've seen now going forward in the court system and how you deal with cases. Sure.
Well, if I can again look at one of the good things that's come out of this is that all the courts, albeit that the courts have for quite some time used AVL rather than having prisoners brought into courts for quite a lot of hearings, they've increased. As part of the $350 million stimulus package that the government put on the table, $15 million has been allocated to additional AVL equipment across the justice sector. So that's not just courts, but also corrections and police, which is fantastic. That will enable increased use of AVL, including even for a police officer to be able to be beamed into a courtroom to give evidence, rather than have to wait outside a courtroom for half a day to be called. Again, an efficiency, so that's great, and also important for social distancing. There was definitely a reduction in the number of matters being heard. So until quite recently, the Magistrates Court basically split their magistrates into an A team and a B team. And so in 1 week, the A team would be there, and then the next week, the B team would be there, so that if somebody did get sick, it wouldn't wipe out the whole of the magistracy. And so, as that obviously an understandable safety measure, but it's meant that the capacity of the court to hear matters has been significantly reduced. So the courts have prioritised certain types of matters. So, for example, domestic violence and high-end crime. A number of less significant and serious matters have been adjourned into the future. So that's been the immediate impact. The long-term impact, of course, is going to be the backlog, because there will be a significant backlog, and that's going to be a real challenge for the courts, but also for the police and the DPP in prosecuting those matters. And I imagine, although I don't have data, it'll also have some challenges for corrections, because there are no doubt quite a lot of people on remand who may have had their matters dealt with and been released, who might still be in custody. But as I say, I don't have the data on that. So it has had a pretty significant impact on the courts.
Yeah. I know the redevelopment of the courts has been going on in Adelaide itself at the same time. Has that compounded, or has that been sort of incidental to COVID-19, do you think?
Look, it's continued. I think they've had a couple of difficulties with getting a few products out of particular countries, and they may have had to make some decisions about alternative products. But the new jury courtrooms in the Samuel Way building were due to be ready by the end of June, and I understand from the Chief Justice that they're still well and truly on track to opening. So that hasn't caused any delays at all.
So that's good. That's fantastic.
That is very good. Yeah.
Nice shiny building, which is what we need. Maybe to change tack, increased isolation, people in lockdowns. Lockdowns are the wrong phrase, but staying away and away from open areas. Domestic violence comes up as a question quite regularly. How's the department been dealing with that? The perceived increased risk, is that actually happening, and how are you actually helping make sure that those people are protected?
My understanding from the Commissioner of Police, Grant Stevens, is that we actually haven't seen an increase in reporting of domestic violence. That doesn't mean it's not happening. Obviously, some people have suggested, understandably, that if you are living with a perpetrator and you're isolated, your ability to report is restricted somewhat. So, you might think that we should be very much conscious that domestic violence could have increased or be not reported. What has been interesting is that there has been a significant increase in hits on websites relating to domestic violence. So, women's shelters and websites around dealing with domestic violence. So there's clearly an increased, online interest in it. We're lucky enough to have got $1.4 million over the next 2 years from the Commonwealth for increased legal assistance for people who are the alleged victims of domestic violence. So we're in the process of getting instructions from the attorney about how that might be allocated across the sector. We've obviously been having conversations with the legal assistance sector, so that will be great to have that additional funding over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Maybe time for one more question. As you look forward and all the areas that the department does look after, what's the opportunities for the department to sort of springboard with the lessons learned and maybe deliver in a different way to the community or to the public and do it better than what you've done before? Because I know we've talked before that you're always looking for those sort of opportunities. What's out there at the moment? What do you think is going to be the area that you can actually take advantage of?
I think it's online service delivery. It's certainly something that we've been working on for quite a number of years, but I think that's this is an impetus to really push with that. And I think that using CBS again as an example, we did close the customer service centre for safety of staff and also of clients, but we've not had one person complain that they couldn't still get what they needed online or over the phone. Now, as I say, right now we don't have any intention of not reopening the service centre, but I think that there's probably been a shift in the community. A lot of people who probably would never have done something online who've been forced to, and perhaps they've realised, actually, I can do this online and I can do it effectively, and I saved an hour because I didn't have to get on the bus and go into Grenfell Street to get my occupational licence extended or updated. So I think that it's kind of the stars colliding in that I think the community's probably been forced to become more online literate, and seeing that we can deliver our services that way, and often in a more efficient way, probably means it's something that we need to focus on even more than we have before now.
Yeah, indeed. We're getting up against time. I guess from my perspective and the whole community's perspective, thank you, Caroline.
Oh, pleasure.
For the services that you've kept delivering during this time. It is a complicated department that you do look after, and it's been fantastic to see how you've been able to keep delivering to us and find ways to actually maybe deliver to us better, which I know is beneficial. I do want to acknowledge IPAA for setting this up, PwC, Flinders University, and senior members of the government who've continued to run these sessions. I think they've been invaluable to all of us. But before we do finish, I kind of wanted to give you a free pass here to sort of share thoughts, make sure that the takeaway, if you could give everyone a takeaway to go, look, this is what a great leader would benefit from, what would that be?
Oh, look, I don't know that I have great words of wisdom, but I think that as someone who loves to be planned and organised, it's been a fabulous real-life example of having to manage through change and manage when you don't really have any idea what's going on. And I think that if you get the right people around you and you trust them, you can, and you're honest with them, that you can run a business or run a government department in times of, I wouldn't say chaos, I don't think it's ever been chaos, but I think in times of great uncertainty. And as a leader, that makes me really proud, but also really confident that we can deal with whatever comes our way.
Indeed. Caroline, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, and we'll see you all soon.